to the Lions of Liberty podcast. Here is your host, your guide, your shining beacon of liberty.
Hello, everybody. Yes, Brian McWilliams is back with you for another very special edition of Mr. Johnson's Libertyhood. As you guys know, there was a CNN Townhall, the second CNN Townhall for the Libertarian Party, with Mr. Gary Johnson and his Siamese twin, Bill Weld, stuck to him, or I guess you could call it a Guado situation where Bill Weld's kind of mutating out of Gary Johnson's stomach type of deal. So we've got to look at it. We got to break it down. Now, for those of you at home, this is Lions of Liberty episode 234, which means you can find it at lionsofliberty.com/234. And you can find all the archives from Mr. Johnson's Libertyhood at lionsofliberty/Gary. Now, I'm not going to do this alone. I'm terrified to fly solo. So I brought in our very special legal counsel. You might know him. You might love him. His name is Rico. What's up, Rico?
Hey, buddy. No one loves me, but thanks for the sentiment.
Yeah, I know. Well, I'm hoping someday, kind of like a prison pen pal program, one lucky listener out there will start just taking you under her wing and start sending you little love notes and maybe, carve your name into her arm. Something like that.
We're hoping for the same thing.
Yeah, something sweet.
Here we go.
All right. So as people who have heard this show before know, we take a look at the different issues that are being addressed. So typically we look at things that are going through the news media. Today, we're going to run down the topics that were brought up during the CNN Town Hall. It might be a little bit longer of a show. We're going to try to buzz through them pretty quick. Now, for things that we say, okay, Gary did a great job expressing the ideals of liberty, or Bill Weld did, doesn't happen as much, but Bill Weld did, we give it a Johnson! But for stuff that we think, that's just a fat boot of crap, like putting your foot right in a boot just full of dog crap, that we give a JohnsOFF to. So, Rico, are you ready to burn this town hall to the ground?
Well, I have an issue with your rules because I don't know that Gary has ever done a great job of expressing the ideas of liberty. So we can make this a real short show and just say JohnsOFF. See you later.
It's so true. God, although I'd say overall, I will say that I think this one was a vast improvement over the last one. Now, that's not saying much, but, they at least came across as less awkward. Like, it started off pretty awkward, again. But it got less awkward as it went along, and I think they're kind of finding their groove a little bit. Now, that still doesn't mean they're expressing the ideals of liberty or communicating them that well, but still, it's better.
And Weld is not a libertarian at all, so...
Oh, not even close.
Not even close. There's no even hint or pretense of it anymore. I don't know why there's an L next to his name, but apparently he raises $1 million a day. I think he said that at some point in time during...
He did, yeah.
Which did make sense, because they just said, well, you've raised $1 million in the last month, and then he says, oh, I raise $1 million a day. Well, where's that money going, Bill?
He's literally called one day. He's like, yeah, I put in my time. One day I call my very, very rich aunt, and that's it. I don't know how they get that number either. Yeah, Bill Weld, he's like, I love fundraising. He just loves talking to people, getting his fiery face all worked up.
Yeah.
By the way, did you notice that they've completely dropped saying fiscally conservative, socially liberal, and now every time they say socially inclusive? Have you noticed that?
I did not notice that. That's a good pickup point.
Yeah, they love to do that. I guess maybe people like us were crapping on him for saying liberal all the time and just how annoying it was. But all right, so let's get into it. We don't have time for this. Here we go.
We don't? I got nothing to do.
Probably the people who listen to this have nothing to do either. All right, so hey, here we go. First topic, Rico. Now, Anderson Cooper talked about how this is the, they had to have this town hall because it was basically the people demanded it. The third parties are so popular. And the first topic that they really got into is how Clinton was, quote unquote, beholden to people. And those people, of course, being, I guess, people that had her husband in to give a speech, or people that she was beholden to give certain contracts to, like Uranium One. So, Rico, what did you think about Gary's answer to that?
I kind of liked it. He finally at least started to call out Clinton a little bit on her shadiness. I think at the last town hall, he's like, "Oh, I'm not going to throw stones," blah, blah, blah.
Which he said again in this one, by the way.
But he did say that again, but then he kind of did throw the stones. So
he did a little bit. He threw a couple pebbles.
At least he put her down and called her out just a smidge. You know, he said pay to play.
Yeah.
So he's pointing out it's cronyism. That's what she does. And then, of course, Bill sidestepped the whole issue to me. He just they after Gary spoke on it, they asked Bill, "Well, what do you think?" And I think he loves Hillary because he just doesn't say a bad word about her. But then he kind of went into Trump a little bit. So
totally. No, yeah,
it was
exactly.
a mixed bag.
Yeah, I agree. I think Gary. So it's a mixed bag. So you're not giving it a grade. I'll give it a grade. I'll tell my point. So I think that agreed. I think he went after her more. That was good. At least he did say, like, pointed out. Yeah, she's basically giving contracts to people that are having Bill Clinton speak. That ain't right. Cronyism. And Weld mentioned the $1.2 trillion tax increase for her plans, but like you said, Weld stopped himself. He didn't go any farther. And Gary, and I'm going to tie this into a later topic too, because he came back around on this too. And was later on, I'll tie these into the same topic, might as well. So later on, a libertarian who was leaning towards Trump, which, by the way, who the hell are these people?
Yes, I was listening to that. I'm like, what the fuck libertarian is leaning towards Trump?
Seriously.
Who is this guy?
I don't understand it. I mean, exactly. Who is this plant? Who is this Trump plant that's in there trying to win the Libertarian Party? But they asked Gary about the Clinton emails, or he asked Gary about the Clinton emails, what do you think that should have been done? And of course, Bill Weld, in typical Weldian fashion, said, well, there was inefficient evidence of criminal intent, and I don't think any prosecutor would have done it. Of course, I'm sure he's texting Hillary Clinton eggplant emojis afterwards. Did I do good, baby, the kind of thing.
Yeah.
And Gary then also he goes, they asked him, like, do you understand why 64% of voters find Hillary untrustworthy? And he says, oh, I totally understand it. Yeah. And he goes, but, I'll leave that to others. It's like, dude, grow some fucking balls and go after her. You're giving a platter. It's got a piece of cake on it. And the cake is Hillary's stupid face. Take a bite out of Hillary's face.
Seriously, Anderson Cooper had to be like, how much more of a softball can I give you guys? Swing the bat. Come on, go after it a little bit, please.
And he also, he gave her a pass on ISIS because he's talking about, I blame her for the foreign policy and what happened in Libya and Syria. And he goes, but, sure, our enemies, ISIS, people that align with ISIS ended up with arms, but, you can't know that, not intentional. It's like, oh, and you're giving her an out now, too. You're pointing out exactly what she did wrong, and now you're going to give her an out for that, you frickin' puss.
Exactly. Everything he says, or most things he says, just seems so wishy-washy. So he did slightly better, but if he had an F last time, I'd give him like a D+ here. Right. It's just not good enough.
So then it's not good enough. So what does that mean? What is it, Rico?
Well, I'd say it's a John's off.
John's off is right. Just like you said, a D+, maybe you're passing, but you're not doing well. That's still a John's off in our book. So let's move on to another topic. Actually, while I'm jumping around order-wise, but we'll shift a little bit to a topic that Anderson Cooper broke up. You mentioned that Gary is wishy-washy, and Anderson Cooper actually pointed that out. I mean, didn't say like to his face, "Hey, you're a wishy-washy little bitch," but he did say, hey, maybe, Gary, you kind of say, maybe I'm wrong, and perhaps, and I've never heard a candidate say that before. Now, do you remember what he said in that instance, Rico? Did you have a note on that?
I don't remember exactly what he said. No, I didn't. I remember I wasn't thrilled by the answer because I thought it was, again, a softball, and he could have been, his response could have been like, yeah, it's because I don't think, the government knows everything. So that's kind of our platform, is the government is not the all-knowing overlord of, what you should think and do. But he didn't do anything like that.
No, he just kind of did that oh shucks Gomer Pyle-esque kind of, well, what is it? If you tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything, which is, I swear, it's literally out of like Macon, okay? Like Gomer Pyle Macon. So, and then, but oddly enough, the crowd liked it. Anderson Cooper was like giggling and clapping, I think. And by the way, I think Anderson Cooper's going to vote for him. I shit you not. He was pretty into them during this.
Yeah, at least he gave some sort of memorable quip there, though. I'll give him credit for that because, he's not exactly a dynamo personality all the time.
Yeah.
Certainly Weld's not. So, and that, you need a little bit of that. You need to, get the crowd to say, hey, you know what? He's a likable guy. He's funny. He's charming, whatever.
Yeah, and it is interesting. I mean, when you think about it, and I remember on our forum, which you can go to the forum, by the way, which we have, we host town halls there, and we'll talk about them. So you can go to on our Facebook page, Lions of Liberty Forum. Feel free to join. If you're not a psychopath, we'll let you right in. But people were saying that Johnson, he's saying perhaps, and that's not good. But I agree with you. I think that in truth, not coming across as like a Trump where you're just like, this is it's like I like that he said, I don't know everything. And I think part of the way you should go about leading is to admit when you have mistakes so you can correct them. And I think his exact quote was, the fastest way to quit a mistake is by admitting it, and then you can get to fixing it. So I like that too, man. I'm going to give it a Johnson.
Okay, well, it's a very minor point, so I'll agree with you and say John's on.
All right, so let's get back to the comments about Donald Trump. What did you think about the Trump comments that were said? Well,
Weld said he had a screw loose. I guess that was a comment that made all the news.
Yeah,
It's got their names in the paper and on the the news. Trump has a screw loose. That's a good little quip again, I guess.
It got a good laugh. I mean, I will say, I was shocked to see. I never thought Weld was going to be the funny guy and Gary was going to be the straight man, but that seems to be the way this thing is playing out.
That's a pretty sad state of affair if Bill Weld's the slapstick of the duo.
I know, usually it's the dummy that sits on the lap that's telling the jokes, so it's just shocking to see that situation reversed. Somebody tell these vaudevillians to get their act together. All right, anyway, go ahead. What are you saying?
But I don't think they went after the Republicans enough. If you're going to slam Trump there, you got to kind of court the Trump voters, too. And it seemed like most of their responses were trying to get people dissatisfied on the left to vote for them, pointing out where Hillary wasn't great, which is good. But, to have any chance at 15% or higher, whatever their goal is, you need to get go after Trump on all the points. So I don't think they went after Trump enough. But they did have that little bullet point.
Yeah, and Gary had a good point, too. He talked about the tariffs. I mean, he really didn't talk, to your point, he didn't really talk much about Trump. And the one thing he did mention was the tariffs. Who pays for that, which is good. It's a solid point. But I agree with you. They really did not appeal to the Trump crowd as much as they really could have. They talked a little bit about balancing the budget, but for the most part, I think it really focused on a lot of the foreign intervention, terrorism stuff, and then kind of civil liberties and that kind of thing, I think a lot more than it did focus on anything that's really on the conservative spectrum. I mean, they touched upon, maybe this is a good time to touch upon the religious liberty stuff, because that's a very conservative topic. So,
they brought up the Nazi cake again.
They did. They didn't say Nazi cake, but did they say Nazi? No, I don't think he actually said it.
I don't remember.
But he did bring up the cake. Yeah, they did bring up the cake. And Anderson Cooper also brought up Gary's quote, which he's getting a ton of press for, saying that religious freedom as a category is a black hole, which, I mean, I don't know. That's one of those things you say, Gary, why would you ever say that in the first place? Because especially if you want any shot at any of these conservative voters, they're clearly going to object to that. But also, just in general, that's the whole religious freedom thing has been a point of contention with libertarians, obviously, because Gary Johnson is saying you should still be able to force people to bake a cake. And he didn't back down from that. He's like, he actually, in my opinion, really took a horrible tact in just saying, well, that's the law. You have to sell the cake. That's the law. It's like, well, that's not a good answer. Just because it's a law doesn't mean that it's the proper law. It just means that enough people pushed it through, and that's now the law because, a vocal minority said it has to be.
Yeah.
And then go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, man.
Well, the note that I wrote on it, what he said is no discrimination allowed. And there's definitely a difference between government discrimination and, private discrimination. And perhaps you can frown on private discrimination as, a moral flaw, but as what the government should be involved in, who people should, have to associate with or do business with, that's overstepping the boundaries of government. And it's a clear place to distinguish where you are different than Republicans or Democrats and saying, look, government is not going to micromanage your life. If you don't like something, you vote with your wallet, you don't have to find or, frequent that establishment or whatever, but it's a private matter and government is not going to be in every aspect of your life. So again, I don't like the message he's kind of delivering.
Yeah, well, you know what? Weld is fond of saying we're going to get you out of the boardroom or get government out of the boardroom and out of the bedroom. Well, this is in the boardroom. I mean, most of the time, these are small businesses that are affected, except for like Hobby Lobby is the only, I guess, real big business exception. But usually it's small businesses, but still, you're in the boardroom. If you're forcing people to do something and to accept customers in, if they don't want to serve, that is being in the boardroom. And here's my big problem with this stuff, too. Like these types of laws, and again, I wrote that same note down, Gary, allow for that kind of discrimination. We don't want to pass a law that allows for it. But if there are laws that say you can't discriminate about this against this certain people, you can't do this and that, that's so easy to manipulate that law for personal gain, for vengeance, have a misunderstanding, and have a court case about it and ruin someone's business. Where, look, if someone's honestly discriminating against you, it should be easy enough for people to test out that theory. If you're gay and you go in a bakery, they will make cake, and you say, hey, just to make sure, gay friend, go in and order a cake. Just see if they make a cake for you as well. Now, if they don't make the cake again, okay, discrimination. But to bring government in, I just think adds all these layers of bureaucracy and court cases and lawsuits on top of everything else. And it's just adding it to the situation where it's just not needed, especially in today's society with social media and Yelp and everything else.
Yeah, that was just what I was about to say is there's so many other avenues to kind of shed light on a business that you don't agree with. And a business that's going to discriminate is not long for the business world. They're not going to last. Yeah. Likely. So there's your answer. They're going to go out of business, and that takes care of that problem.
Bingo.
So.
Well, I'd say that this is a John's off.
I agree. John's off as well.
All right. What should we talk about next? Here's a quick one. Now, they talked about, and I had a note before the CNN Townhall was announced, which, by the way, CNN, who announces a town hall 2 days before it airs? What the hell's wrong with you? Give us a little notice. But I wrote down a note. Drew Carey, Ohio's own Drew Carey.
Oh, and where does he live now? Yeah.
Yeah, well,
he
of course.
He hasn't been back to Ohio in 15 years.
He's moved everybody, moved his entire family out of the state. So, but he hosted a Libertarian fundraiser in Bill Weld. They raised like $100,000, which is great. But during I read a story on it, and in the story, Gary Johnson, somebody at the fundraiser asked Gary Johnson about Supreme Court nominations, and he goes, "Oh, well, you know what? I leave that up to Bill Weld." And I was like, "That's idiotic."
Actually, I made a note about that too, where they asked about Gary about you probably might have an opportunity to name 2 or 3 Supreme Court justices. He deferred it to Weld, and Weld said, "I would look."
Yeah.
Wait, what? The vice president is putting forth the nominees for the Supreme Court?
Apparently so. It's the new paradigm, man. They're introducing it.
When they sat down to divide up their duties, was Gary just like, well, if I get elected president, I just don't think I'm going to have time to go through the Supreme Court candidates.
They just take a hat, they just wrote down jobs, and they pick them out at random. And that's who's going to do it. Bill, it looks like Bill Weld's also involved. He's in charge of the nukes. Supreme Court and the nukes. I got in charge of education. I'll be overseeing school lunches. And
Gary just snapped his fingers like, shit, I really wanted that one.
Can we redraw, Bill? No, Gary. Only 3 redraws. We agreed. By the way, do you think that they're going to replace, the presidential march, like dun, 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 that song? I anticipate if they win that song is going to be replaced with the commercial for My Buddy. You know that song?
My buddy,
my buddy, my buddy, my buddy, my buddy, and me.
My buddy, my buddy, my buddy, my buddy. Wherever I go, he goes. My buddy, my buddy, my buddy.
I do remember that song.
That's what we played, but you have to imagine it played really, really profoundly by an orchestra.
Could they make a commercial? Do you remember the commercials? They had like a clubhouse, and like one kid would pop out his head out the window, and the other kid would pop his head out the door.
Oh yeah, we need that.
Would be like a little toy. Come on, Gary and Bill Weld.
That needs to be the next commercial.
Campaign commercial gold right there.
Has to be. So anyway, getting back to the Supreme Court, they doubled down on that tonight. Asked again. Somebody asked about it. Who's gonna name the Supreme Court justice? What do you look for in Supreme Court justices? God. And they said, look for somebody who follows the Constitution. And then he goes, Bill's got some thoughts. Like,
you know what? I forgot what Bill Weld even said after he said I would look. I was just so blown away by it. Like, you're not even going to have a pretense of running this by the man elected president.
Nope, absolutely not. Does not care.
It's amazing.
So frustrating.
Yes.
All right, that was obviously a John's off.
I agree. John's off.
Yeah. All right, how about a little love? You wanted to talk about Gary's answer on guns. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I believe, and I'll just preface this by stating that almost all the people asking questions from the audience I disliked. There was maybe a few that weren't horrible.
There's one we'll save for the end that I really liked, but
yeah, I know where you're going with that one. But yeah, so the person asked, well, should you be able to buy? I think he said AK-47s, and Gary Johnston correctly pointed out, look, some of the weapons you're talking about are already illegal. You can't buy fully automatic weapons. He pointed out it is a misunderstood issue. And even if you went about outlawing the guns, I think the number he used was 30 million. So even if, say, 15 million people turned in their guns, you're still creating a class of criminals that has not necessarily done anything wrong. Just because they bought a gun legally and now you're going to say it's illegal, they become a criminal if they hold on to their property.
Right.
So I liked his answer. I thought was pretty good on that.
Yeah, I agree. I thought it was pretty good, and he could have gone a little deeper. I find most of his answers, I want him to go a little bit deeper on for the most part, but he does
like
make
his fiance.
What? Oh, I forgot he mentioned his fiance during the debate or this town hall. Okay, but. I want him to go a little bit farther on that, but he did get across a pretty good message. And again, you're doubling down on the fact that you will turn mass amounts of people into criminals, and you will, and just the sheer challenge of actually getting those guns, even if you wanted to pass this legislation, is just foolish. So, give it a grade?
Well, before I give it a grade, you have to factor in another aspect of guns in Weld's point, where he mentioned that no one on the terrorist watch list should be able to buy a gun. And we've talked about this before. There is no discernible process for how someone gets on the terrorist watch list, how they are notified of this, what kind of recourse they have. So to say that a person is just deprived of a constitutional right without due process because of some secret government list, that doesn't really fly as a libertarian principle to my reading. So I'm going to factor that into my answer and give the Johnson Weld campaign or ticket a John's off on the gun issue once again.
John's off from Rico on the guns. You know what? They actually, Bill Weld, on that same topic of lists, they doubled down again as he loves to talk about that 1,000-strong FBI task force all the time. They did it again in this debate, and Gary Johnson backed him up on it too, which is really annoying. But he mentioned the 1,000-strong, FBI units, and he mentioned lists again. He mentioned that, the guy who shot up the club in Orlando, or was it Miami? I think it was, anyway, that shot up the club in Orlando. He was on a watch list. We all know this. He was on an FBI watch list. Then they dropped him off because they had no good evidence to keep him on there. And Bill Weld goes, that wouldn't happen. That would never happen without us. With the Mopulus, nobody ever got dropped. And when if I'm in there, no one's getting dropped. And I'm like, well, that's great to know. Wonderful. So if any reason I end up on a watch list, I'm there forever and ever and ever. Wonderful, Bill. And apparently I can't buy a gun. It's great.
Yeah. Gary kind of had a decent counterpoint I don't think it was right on the same question, but where he said, look, if there's a lone wolf, you cannot stop a lone wolf 100% of the time. It's not possible. Things are going to happen. And it's just, in a small way, a little refreshing to hear that a person say, look, we can't have an answer for everything. As much as, people sitting at home watching the show want the government to say, I'm going to do this, and you're never going to have to worry about an attack ever because we're going to kill ISIS. We're going to, wipe them off the face of the earth, blah, blah, blah. That's not going to happen. Okay? So, you know what? Reality. And at least Gary could admit reality on that particular issue.
Yeah.
Or point.
Yeah, that is true. I'm not going to give that a grade, but it's an interesting point.
Yeah.
Here's one that I think we can get behind. And we're already at 25 minutes in. My God. All right, here's what I think we can get behind. I really liked both of their answers on education. And what they said, basically, they asked about, do you want to eliminate the Department of Education? Gary said, yes, I definitely want to eliminate it. He used an example about how inefficient it was, talking about New York sending 13 cents to the government and getting 11 cents back, but then you have to jump through hoops to get that money and spend 4 cents. I don't know if it actually is real math, by the way, but he likes to talk about it. He always throws the same thing out, so I'm hoping somebody vetted it. But he then made a really excellent point, and that point was that when you give states the freedom outside of government stomping down and saying it must be done this one way, you give them the freedom to try programs. That's when you okay, this is going to work. All these programs are doing better. Our kids are getting higher scores. Their graduation rates are up. They can have the freedom to try something. And if it works, other schools are going to adopt it. And if it doesn't work, you can look at it and say, well, let's not do that. That was fucking dumb.
Well, yeah, I agree, obviously. I was once again annoyed with the questioner. Basically, the way it came off is like, well, how are we going to know what to do if the federal government doesn't tell us? It's like, you're a teacher and you need guidance from the federal government. Are you serious?
Every time he's making a lesson plan, he writes his congressman.
Look, I'm thinking about having no homework this weekend. Is that cool? Come on. You're supposed to be able to exercise some kind of independent judgment.
That would be lovely.
And the more local control is, the better. Like if, I'm going to go talk to my teacher about what my son's doing in class, I don't want to hear like, well, my hands are tied. I have to do what the federal government tells me. You want to say, look, these are my ideas. This is what I found to be effective in the past, and this is what I found to not work so well. And you're like, okay, that makes sense. But to have a government that you're never going to be able to talk to anyone, you have no recourse about what they say, it's just ridiculous that people still think, let's have standards set forth by the federal government. And the only thing the federal government has proved over the years is no matter how much money they throw at something, it just gets wasted.
Yeah. Yeah, so, there's statistics that show in truth, the more money that's thrown at something by the government, the worse the outcome actually typically is. Because there's just that much more, bureaucracy added on top. That the money is just thrown away and wasted. It also reminds me of a little bit, totally different topics, but in regards to just this blanket, the government knows best. You look at minimum wage as a good example of a blanket, saying, okay, everybody has to do this one thing, and how at a local level it does not make any sense for many places. It goes, okay, you look at somewhere like Los Angeles, maybe you can afford $15 minimum wage here. It's a megalopolis. Then you go look at some small town in Nevada, they can't afford $15 minimum wage. And
actually, as a Cleveland, I'm a suburb of Cleveland, it's a very on point topic because the city of Cleveland, there's a petition to institute a $15 minimum wage, which is such a problem. It's just in the city. But what the people petitioning just don't get is if the current minimum wage in Cleveland's like $7 or $8, so they're jumping almost
doubling, yeah.
Yeah, and it's only effective in the city limits. So all those small businesses are going to say, okay,
See you later.
We're going to the suburbs.
Yeah.
We're going to move 2 miles down the road and screw you guys.
Yeah, it'll be even more of a ghost town than it is now.
But it's just like people just don't get the economic realities. You can't just force something on businesses without there being repercussions.
Yeah, exactly right. I think it's interesting that Black Lives Matter, one of their things, and maybe this is, well, you know what, hold on. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's finish up on education. I want to talk real quick about what Weld said, then we'll move on to Black Lives Matter because it ties in. So yes, good point, Rico, about how education needs to be brought down to local level and how that's better because you can customize it. But Weld had a great statement too, which I liked on this, and I was a little surprised. But he said that, brick and mortar colleges, four-year colleges aren't the answer. We need more VOTEC. We need more job-centric schools. We don't need colleges cranking out grads who aren't going to get jobs. And I thought, bravo, Bill. It's one of the few things you've ever said I've agreed with you with.
Yeah, I don't know if when I was listening to his answer, I kind of thought he was implying the government should be, and maybe I was just misread what he was saying, but I took it as like the government needs to look into providing vocational training or whatever. So I don't know if that's what he meant. Maybe I just made that up out of thin air, but that's kind of the impression I got. So,
I didn't get that impression. I got more of the impression, and maybe I'm just reading into it and projecting what I wanted him to say onto it, but I read it as more him countering the whole push by like Hillary Clinton wants to add, because he mentioned her 1.2 trillion she's going to add to the budget. And I think maybe this is pushing back against the concept of everybody's got to go to college, that whole platform and the whole Bernie platform, everybody, free college for everybody, free community college for everybody, and just saying that's not for everybody. Not everybody should go to college. There's more people should look at these other schools, these two-year schools. I don't think he was saying it's the government's role to do that, especially, when they're talking about getting rid of the Department of Education. I'm guessing Bill's not saying, well, we should be involved in secondary education, though. Yeah,
that would be good if that was his message. But I know where you're going to go with the Black Lives Matter. Yeah. So that could tie into what I was saying that his intent was on that statement, if that makes sense.
Interesting. So, well, I guess I don't know what you're going to say next. So I'm going to, on education, give it a Johnson.
I will also give it a Johnson with a little bit less enthusiasm than you.
I just like to do it.
That's general life as well.
All right. So we're going to move on to Black Lives Matter. But unfortunately, guys, we're also going to move on to the land of Liberty Make-Believe.
All right, Charlie. Neighborhood of Make-Believe.
Yes, welcome to the land of Liberty Make-Believe, everybody. Rico, this is your first trip to the land of Liberty Make-Believe. What do you think? What do you think of our beautiful land?
I love it. It's like I'm on shrooms.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Gary Johnson must have been on shrooms when he was talking about Black Lives Matter. Now, what's funny, though, is that he starts off Black Lives Matter because there was a woman in the crowd who was a protester and got shot in the leg protesting for Black Lives Matter, which, of course, is awful. It shouldn't happen when you're peacefully protesting. She asked him about Black Lives Matter and what the movement meant and how it affected him. And Gary started off pretty strong, I thought. Basically, Gary said, well, my head was in the sand. Everybody's head was in the sand. So this is a wake-up call that discrimination exists, and it has existed. So it was slap, slap, wake up. And I think under the circumstances with a very tough question, that was a pretty decent answer. What did you think of that?
Okay, well, I'll point out this was one of the questioners that I really didn't mind. I thought it was a valid question. But how is his head in the sand that racism didn't exist? He was the governor of a state. This never happened in New Mexico. Where's he been?
Doing meth and doing pot in New Mexico, man. It's just right in front of you.
I thought it was a little bizarre to say like his head was in the sand. Like, you're the leader of a state. One of your principal jobs is to be cognizant of all these issues affecting different, subsets of the population.
I hear what you're saying, but it's one of those tricky questions, though, where, his answer, I think, was a very politically correct answer in that it's basically saying, oh, you know what, yes, there definitely is stuff. And he's talked about justice reform before, and he talked about it during this as well, which was good. But he's basically saying, yes, it's a problem. Yes, there's still racism in America, but I didn't realize to what extent. And your movement has really opened my eyes. So he doesn't have to go into too many details about it, which is probably good for him. So I don't know. I just thought it was a good way of answering that question and basically just being like, here you go. Here's a snack, and I'm going to move on to a new thing.
Yeah, it wasn't a very deep response, but I guess.
But he got away without getting any black eyes. That's not a pun. But then, and here's where we're going to the land of liberty make-believe, people. Then he went on to say... Actually, I'm sorry, Weld went on to say, and of course they are my buddies, we have to talk about them, that there's a national emergency going on right now because male black youths are out of work. They're 4 times more likely to be jailed if encountered in law enforcement situations, which of course is horrible, and that they're not getting educations. So then Bill Weld said they had to, quote unquote, concentrate the power of government to make sure they can get jobs. It's the job of the government to respond, libertarian or no. What?
Horrible.
The fuck? Are you New Dealing us over here? Like, what the hell is that? What, are you going to massive projects going out there? Public works? Are we building bridges? We're going to build some monuments. We're going to put some grass down in the center medians and give people $20 an hour. Like, what the hell are you talking about?
It's a horrible, horrible answer on a few different levels. First, just on the specific issue, the federal government is not a job creator. It just doesn't work that way.
Which Gary Johnson says all the damn time. Bill Weld loves to undermine it. It's like Gary Johnson always says that. The government can't create jobs.
So it's horrible on that level. And on a broader level, it's saying, look, if there's a really tough question, well, fuck our libertarian principles. We're going to be a big government. And it's like, wait a minute. You're supposed to champion the idea of, people being able to kind of pursue their own destinies, so to speak. But now you're saying, no, federal government's getting involved if we think it's a big deal. So
when the going gets tough, the tough get more government.
Exactly.
Bill Weld's bumper sticker. So for that, what are you going to give it, Rico?
John's off.
John's off is right. Ugh, God. Started off decent, ended up terrible. Just tragic. All right, let's see. We're running a little long. I'm going to try to...
We got to talk about the marijuana.
Yes, I'll say that'll be the two things. We'll wrap it up. We'll talk marijuana, and then we're going to talk my favorite part of the entire show.
Oh, I'm interested to hear what that is. Well, the marijuana lady was so annoying to me.
She was really annoying. But you know what? I give her credit. More than a lot of people, she at least had some idea what she was talking about, which was nice. Like she at least knew what CBD was, and it wasn't the same as THC. Because most people that step up, they're just like, what are we going to do about the children? And they have no fucking clue what they're talking about.
I don't understand what her point was. She's like, well, what are we going to do about high potency strain? It's like, we're not advocating 5-year-olds get a bong and have unlimited access to the dispensary, okay? But she kept going on and on. Like, well, what about the high potency? What about the high potency? It's like, get off of it, okay? I don't like Gary's answer. He seemed to kind of skirt the issue. At one point, he ignored it, and then he said, well, we need R&D, blah, blah, blah. That's not the answer. No. Okay, yeah, research and development is great, but that's not the point. The point is government should not be regulating it in the first place.
Right.
And he just, not only marijuana, but other drugs. But he's so far removed from going down that road, and it's very disappointing as a libertarian candidate to not just be able to say, look, it's not something that the federal government at all needs to be regulating, much less the state governments. So
yeah, exactly. When also just making the point that, in the free market, if it's completely legal and it's out there, people are going to put it out there on the market. They're going to have the potencies listed because there's different grades of marijuana, and you educate people about it. Say, okay, yes, just like anything else. You look at your alcohol, it's got a certain amount of alcohol in it. This is stronger and that's weaker. That's the free market. It's not like these people aren't going to get it. Kids are going to get it, except now they're getting it in the black market. So they don't know how strong it is. That's where you're going to see kids, getting more fucked up than they expect to be fucked up. So talk about that a little bit more. You know, it's like they can see they can see the actual potency listed on the container instead of just talking to a guy in an alley that's like, this weed's called brain raper. And they're like, oh, it sounds wonderful, you know?
It seems like such an easy answer, too, for a libertarian candidate.
And for a pothead libertarian candidate.
Seriously. And he just won't even go down it should be legal. He wanted to remove it. It's not a schedule, whatever it is. He wants to kind of reduce it. But it's not good enough what his answer is. It's just not. It should be an easy answer for him. And he's just so wishy-washy about it, and it's very frustrating. That's
the story of the evening, in truth. I mean, like I said earlier, he did better in this one. They came across better and less awkward, but it's still, that's the thing in all of it. He should be able to answer all of these better, more coherently, hit the points better. Like people were talking about, again, in our forum, they were talking about how Anderson Cooper was expressing the ideas of libertarianism better than Gary Johnson was just reading off the cue cards about the libertarian platform, like from the website.
Maybe they should be like, hey, can we borrow those cue cards? It sounded like you really know what you're talking about, and we could use some help.
Gary's trying to read the reflection in Anderson Cooper's cool blue eyes to get a little hint. So, yeah, John's off.
I agree. John's off.
Yeah. All right, let's wrap it up with something a little bit more fun. And I feel bad we didn't really get to go into the mind weld at all. It's just too hard to do. So people just, maybe I'll play it at the end of the show just so you can on your own just get a nice bottle of bourbon, stick your head deep in the freezer, and just inhale the alcohol fumes as you go into the mind weld, because we won't be doing it on this show. But we will wrap up with something equally fun. And that was a question that came towards the end from Libertarian Michael Bernstein. And I have to say, a massive amount of respect for this guy. This guy stood up and in a very gravelly voice, which I wish I could find the clip. I couldn't pull the clip. I can't find a YouTube to pull it from. But in a very gravelly voice, asked about Gary Johnson's positions on deeper libertarian issues that aren't really raised much. And then asked about, basically he goes, so, what do you think about legalizing the sex industry?
He's like, I know, I've been having trouble ever since they went to a chip card.
It's really, it was so unexpected and so funny. And it's like the guy, it's like, you're on national TV, right, man? Like, you're asking about that's the one question you're asking, legalization of sex work. Now, granted, I think that is an important issue. I think you probably would agree, because there's, take it out of the back alleys, legalize it. Women can do what they want with their own damn bodies. If they want to sell them, good. You can probably make a very good living off it, and keep it out in the open. It's like cleaner ratings, everything's great. But this guy to ask it, wow, good job, man. Now Gary, though, he completely fucked the answer up, though. He was saying, it's a state issue, which is fine, I guess. But then he was saying, that was it. He just basically left it at that. He goes, well, I would never do it, but I'd go to Nevada there because it's safe. But it's like, again, answer it better. Talk more about the issue. Explain why it's more beneficial if it's legal. Explain why the women are safer if it's legal. Explain why everybody's safer if it's legal. It's just like he stops short every time.
So I don't know if it's a matter of him not just understanding the overall issue, or just not wanting to be too extreme, or perhaps a little bit of both. Because the whole time they seem to be kind of positioning their campaign as like a centrist type of thing. Like, well, we're kind of good on some Republican issues. We're kind of good on some Democratic issues. So we're just kind of like the Venn diagram where they overlap. Come on, that's us. And they don't want to appear or say anything very controversial, even if it's correct.
Yeah.
And that seems to be where they came down on this issue too. Unable or unwilling to articulate, exactly why, the status quo is bad.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's exactly it. They don't want to piss anybody off. And it's funny because in an election where the blustery big statements are all the rage, they seem to be going, as long as we just shut up and stay in the middle and stay pretty much okay, and people can find some stuff they like out of us, we have a shot. And they might be right. I hope they're right,
Well, Anderson Cooper pointed out at the beginning, though, they're like, well, last time you were at 9%, and this time you're 9%. At 9%. So I don't know. Maybe it's time to try something a little bit more daring.
Yeah,
Come on, guys.
yeah, exactly. So for the sex work, I give him a John's off.
I agree. Again, John's off.
And one more quick thing. We don't have to give... Actually, I'm giving a John's off for this, too. Spoiler alert, this is a John's off in advance. They have talked about obesity at the end. We don't need it. I don't need your commentary on this, Rico. I'm just going to talk about it. But they talked about obesity at the end, and Gary Johnson, he goes, well, you know, I really applaud Michelle Obama, and that pissed me off to no extent. Because Michelle Obama, as most people know, pushed through all these horrible lunch programs that gave kids not enough food to eat, cost way more money, and everybody pretty unanimously said, this is horrible. Children all over the United States were posting pictures of their horrible, horrible food on Instagram saying, this is ridiculous, I'm starving all day long, I can't get enough food, and it tastes like shit. And he's like, good job, I can't wait for my fiance to tend my Michelle garden. So fuck you, Gary.
Ditto.
There you go. All right, man. Well, that's it. I got to wrap this up. Rico, do you have any final statements to take our listeners home with?
I think we've kind of harped on it a bunch. They're just not articulating libertarian principles very well to me. I mean, obviously, if you're grading on a curve, they're like an A+ compared to Trump and Clinton. If you're grading in a vacuum as far as how they articulate, really what most libertarians feel, or at least a good majority, I think they're at like a D. And couple that lack of articulation with not very dynamic personalities.
Yeah.
It's just like, I just keep thinking, God, if only these candidates were here 4 years, Trump and Clinton were 4 years ago, and Ron Paul was running as a libertarian, there might have been a chance. But,
yeah, would have killed him, especially on the foreign intervention. Oh, my God.
Someone who actually knows what they're talking about. And yeah. But these are the candidates we got, folks. So,
yeah, deal with them. Well, here's the count from today. My rough count as we've been talking. I have 2 Johnsons and a terrible 7 JohnsOFFs. Oh, boy, man. Pathetic.
Well, I guess we'll see how their numbers stay at 9%.
9.2%. Huge 0.2% gain. All right, guys. Well, that's going to do it for this show. We went a little bit longer than usual, but this was a town hall event, so trust me, we tried as hard as we could to keep it short. But I thank you all for listening along. I thank my guest, the always incredibly insightful legal counsel, Mr. Rico Esquire.
Word.
You can find all of the Lions of Liberty podcasts at lionsofliberty.com. And as Mark always likes to do, let's take it out. Live long
and live free.